You were running on this idea of a universal basic income, which is giving every American $1,000 a month. And are you worried that because you're polling higher, that as other candidates get desperate, they'll start offering $1,100 a month?
Well, that would be a version of victory, Seth. I've said for a while that I'm either going to win or the other candidates are going to sound a lot like me.
I've put things out into the world that I've noticed other candidates a couple weeks later saying, almost verbatim.
We're automating away the most common jobs in the economy right now.
As you know, automation is transforming our economy.
It's not this cliff that we're heading towards. It's actually more of a curve that we're on. What I've been telling people is that we're in the third inning now.
And we can't pretend that it can just be stopped or reversed.
If you look at it, technology is already doing a number on each of these jobs.
So it's not about stopping or reversing technology.
But it's going to be very, very bad for many people and communities. So we have to actually change the measuring sticks to something that would actually make our economy work for us.
It is about making sure that the tectonic social and economic changes that it could drive are changes that can actually work for us.
If enough Americans come together, raise our hands and say, yes, we want universal basic income, then we can make it happen in 2021, and it will be the first thing I do as president.
There's an experiment going on right now in the city of Stockton with what's called universal basic income, where they're actually simply distributing payments to people to make sure that that income floor is lifted.
57% of Americans can't afford an unexpected $500 bill.
The idea is there are too many Americans who couldn't find even $400 in an emergency.
We have to accelerate both our economy and society and broaden our definitions of both work and value.
Maybe we ought to broaden our definition of work.
It's original, I'll give you that.
My wife is at home with our two boys, 6 and 3, one of whom is autistic. And what I say is like, what is her work valued at in GDP? And then people think about it and they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, 0.
If you are taking care of a parent or raising a child, isn't that work? And shouldn't we honor that too?
Because GDP doesn't consider that actual economic contribution.
They're just not in the formal kind of economy, the way that they're traditionally being compensated.
We have to change the way we measure progress in our economy.
We're going to change how we establish how the economy is growing.
We have to actually evolve from GDP as a measuring stick.
We're not going to measure it by abstract numbers like GDP.
We need to create new measurements that actually show how we're doing.
We're going to measure it by how the 90% are doing.
Things that matter to us, like childhood success rates, mental health and freedom from substance abuse, environmental quality, median income and wealth, proportion of elderly in quality care that can actually retire with dignity.
So in my administration, I will measure America's economic success based on your paycheck.
The indicators already show that we're falling apart.
Our country's in trouble.
How many of you get excited about GDP when you wake up in the morning?
GDP is going up.
America's life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years in a row.
And life expectancy is going down.
Most Americans are just tuning into 2020 right now. And most Americans are still finding out about me and the other candidates.
So now that it's starting to winnow down, people are starting to look for the contrasts. And I think it'll be important for me to convey how I'm different from the others. I like the others, I appreciate the others, I admire the others, but I'm not like the others. Right now, the gross domestic product is going up, and life expectancy is going down.
You sound a little bit like Andrew Yang.
One of my supporters said the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. And so that has been something of a rallying cry for me.
The American people, I think, are looking for the opposite of this president, and that's me.
The entire socialism-capitalism dichotomy, again, is out of date and is breaking down. We have to try and take the best of both worlds.
Look, I don't think that my positions are quite the same as any of the others, but...
You've said that neither centrist versus leftist or capitalism versus socialism is the right frame through which to view liberal politics today. So
retrain, reskill, higher productivity work, economy grows, all is well, right? So that is what the macroeconomics textbook says. And then it turns out in real life, when you go look at the numbers of what happened to the manufacturing workers in Michigan or Indiana, 40 to 44% of them left the workforce and were never heard from again.
When they do all the retraining things that well-intentioned center-left programs, like some of the ones I'm running in South Bend, tell them to do, they do all the right things, and they still see their standard of living declining.
You're not going to take 500,000 middle-aged men and turn them into coders or whatever ridiculous fantasy someone is peddling.
By telling a machinist 16 years into his career that from now on he's got to be a nurse's aide, and it's a perfectly good career, but it's not how he understands how he fits into the world.
This is the buzzsaw. This is capital and technology converging in historic ways.
Part of the story of why so many are being left behind has to do with the massive forces changing the world around us: globalization, technology, automation.
Our government has been decades behind in being honest about it and addressing it.
We are probably at the dawn of a new machine age, and yet we haven't really prepared for it in terms of our policies.
If we don't, some very negative and very ugly things, from
A massive surge in alcohol use and drug overdoses,
Depression,
and
of course.
suicides and depression.
substance abuse to the worst kind of white identity politics.
So that's how I came to run for president, on a platform of universal basic income.
That's why we might even need to look at guaranteed income
In response to this incredible transition we're going through.
as a policy that will help smooth the edges of that.
So you put $1,000 a month into their hands.
Just give the family a little more cash.
Well, in addition to the front runners, we also got to know some of the underdogs. And early on, a lot of people noticed that one of them, Andrew Yang, wasn't wearing a tie. Take a look at this. Yeah.
And meanwhile, while Washington's arguing over who looked best on cable today,
So I'm meeting with various legislators in DC being like, guys, what are we going to do? We're in the third inning of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the country. What is the plan? And what do you think they said to me when I said, what is the plan? There's no plan. They looked at me like I was speaking another language.
at a time when the world is moving faster than ever and our challenges are getting more urgent and more complicated than ever, Washington's ability to respond has gotten slower than ever.
So Donald Trump became president because he diagnosed correctly a lot of the problems, but his solutions are unfortunately totally backwards. His solutions are build a wall, turn back the clock, bring the jobs back.
The current White House and the campaign that got us here was the idea that we could somehow turn back the clock.
We're just not confronting it honestly.
It's not honest.
And what I'm saying is we have to move the clock forwards.
Well, that's a very good way of looking at it.
And it's just facts. A very, very data-driven man. The opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. That's why I'm gonna beat him in 2020. It's gonna be glorious.
It was a real challenge to bring the Democratic Party together in 2016. Is it going to be even harder this time around?
Well, I think that's up to us. Today's Groundhog Day, but tomorrow's the day after. And it's our first chance to start to make sure that as a party, we have 2020 look as little like 2016 as possible. Look, it is healthy that we have vigorous, honest, and I hope respectful disagreements about approaches and about some of the details of what we believe in. But at the end of the day, not only the majority of the Democratic Party, but the majority of the country believes in the things that we've got to do to move forward, to have higher wages, to make sure that workers are protected, to make sure corporations pay their fair share in taxes.
Yeah, and Amazon's the most egregious example, where they're now soaking up $20 billion in business and causing 30% of American malls and stores to close, and taxpayers are seeing zero in return. So if you look at what other advanced economies have done, they've figured this out. They've said, look, we need to have a mechanism in place so that Amazon's going to pay its fair share along with Netflix and Delta and these other companies that are paying zero in taxes. So what they've done is they've adopted a value-added tax, where then the American people would get a tiny slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, and on and on. And it's very, very hard for companies like Amazon to game their way out of a value-added tax system.
These are our values. And I'm thinking a lot about the value encoded in the idea of freedom. And when I say delivering freedom, it's going to take more than just cutting every regulation or tax you've ever seen. I'm not interested in preserving Amazon's freedom or Chevron's freedom to not have to pay any federal income taxes at all next year. They're going to be okay. They can pay their fair share and they'll still be just fine.
So why don't we have that?
It's a great question. I mean, people have been advocating for it for quite some time, and my campaign is advocating and championing it right now, because we need to wise up to the fact that companies like Amazon are very smart and moving their earnings through places like Ireland, where the American taxpayer will see none of it, whereas a value-added tax will make it impossible for them to sell to us without paying into our society their fair share.
But they gotta pay their fair share. Because we need resources to deliver freedom.
You may only get one shot, and your first
issue that you're going to push, you get one shot that it may be the only thing you get passed, what is that first issue for your presidency, Mr. Yang?
I would pass a $1,000 freedom dividend for every American adult starting at age 18, which would speed us up on climate change, because if you get the boot off of people's throats, they'll focus on climate change much more clearly.
To end endless war, do something about climate change. Look, if you want the candidate with the most time spent in Washington, of course, I'm not going to be your choice. But the next president, on day one, will be facing challenges that are different in kind than what we saw just a few years and certainly decades ago. I mean, think about where we are with global security, global health security challenges, looking at what's happening in China, cybersecurity challenges happening. And then here at home, we've got an economy that is being profoundly and swiftly reshaped by forces from a gig economy to what's going on with tech companies. In order to make sure that we have a strong future, that we do well here at home and internationally, we're going to have that look to the future that the presidency requires. Not only in order to govern, by the way, but this is also very important in order to win. Remember, every single time in the last half century, every single time that my party has won the White House, it's been with a candidate who was new to national politics, opening the door to a new generation focused on the future.
As Commander-in-Chief, I think we need to be focused on the real threats of the 21st century. And what are those threats? Climate change, artificial intelligence, loose nuclear material, military drones, and non-state actors. And if you look up, we're in the process of potentially losing the AI arms race to China right now, because they have more access to more data than we do, and their government is putting billions of dollars to work subsidizing the development of AI in a way that we are not. We are 24 years behind on technology. And I can say that with authority because we got rid of the Office of Technology Assessment in 1995. Think about that timing. I guess they thought they'd invented everything. The next Commander-in-Chief has to be focused on the true threats of tomorrow. And that's what I will bring to the table as Commander-in-Chief.
Economy has been doing pretty well. What's your 30-second pitch against that?
Well, first of all, let's ask what it means to have a good economy. If one job is not enough, if wages, even when they go up, aren't going up as fast as the cost of long-term care and prescription drugs and retirement and education and the cost of housing, something is wrong. When I'm president, we're not going to measure the performance of the economy by how the Dow Jones is doing.
Right now in this country, we have record high corporate profits, also at record highs stress, financial insecurity, mental illness, even suicides and drug overdoses. If your corporate profits are going up and your life expectancy is going down, which do you care about? We know which one DC cares about, and it's time to change that. It's time to line it up. Instead of measuring ourselves by GDP, which even the inventor 100 years ago said this is a terrible measurement for national well-being and we should never use it as that. And here we are 100 years later following it off a cliff. Robot trucks will be great for GDP and corporate profits. They'll be terrible for many Americans.
We have three big measurements that get thrown in our faces by business and media every freaking day. And what are they? GDP, stock market prices, headline unemployment, right? And they say if these three things are solid, then we're in great shape. GDP, measuring the wrong things. Stock market prices, the top 20% of Americans own 92% of stock market wealth. The bottom 80% own 8%. The bottom 50% of Americans own essentially zero. So if you're cheerleading the stock market, you're cheerleading the fortunes of the top 20% of Americans, which is not obviously relevant to the majority of us. Headline unemployment does not include labor force participation, doesn't include underemployment, doesn't include temporary or gig or contract work. If you look at our labor force participation rate right now, we're at 63%, the same levels as Costa Rica and El Salvador. Multi-decade low. Millions of Americans have gotten pushed out of the workforce. And if you remember Donald Trump in 2016, what did he say? Headline unemployment rate is fake news, and now that he's president, he's like, oh, it's great. You remember that? Remember that switch?
I get that if you have a building with your name on it not far from Wall Street, maybe the Dow Jones and the economy seem like one and the same. But here in Iowa and in South Bend, Indiana, where I live, and in most neighborhoods in big cities and small towns across this country, folks want to know when this good economy is actually going to start making their lives better. And we're going to measure the performance of the economy by the income growth of the 90%.
We need the right measurements for our society. We made up GDP almost 100 years ago. And even the inventor said this is a terrible measurement of national well-being and we should never use it as that. That was 100 years ago.
Right.
And so here we are just still following it 100 years later, being like, oh, GDP is going to tell us how we're doing. We need to evolve.
Do you have an idea for what that new metric might look like? I mean, what is it?
Yes, I do. So I call it the American scorecard, and it keeps GDP as one data point, but it integrates health and life expectancy, mental health and freedom from substance abuse, childhood education and success rates, environmental quality. And we have numbers for these things. And so we can integrate them into our economic measurements. And then at the State of the Union every year as president, I will actually present the scorecard and say, as an example, 8 Americans are dying of drug overdoses every hour. That's terrible and unconscionable. So we're going to get that down by 50% over the next few years. And here's how we're going to do it. And then if individuals or companies or organizations put resources to work to move society in that direction, then they actually get rewarded economically. Because right now the problem is that all the economic rewards cut in this direction, and then all of the helping people rewards cut the other direction.
And when it comes to keeping this country safe, I think our troops and our families deserve a president who's not going to throw himself in military parade and then pardon war criminals, act like TBI is no big deal when he claimed that bone spurs were disqualifying him from being able to serve when it was his turn. I'm ready to take this president on when it comes to keeping this country safe and when it comes to having an economy that doesn't just look good on paper, but actually works for us.
That's what this campaign is all about. It's about redefining our country and our economy to actually work for us, to be able to look our kids in the eyes and say, we fought to leave a country we're still proud of for them. I'm not running for president because I dreamt about being president. I'm running for president because, like so many of you here today, I'm a parent and a patriot. I have seen the future we are leaving for our kids, and it is not something I'm willing to accept. We can do much better, and we must do much better.